Audio test 1 2 3 4. Audio test 1 2 3 4. Yeah. So this one.
Last time we were on a patio
Check.
in Rome, right?
Check. 1 2 3 4. Check.
Testing.
Check. Good. Thank you.
Slightly different temperature now. But just as much craziness.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Danny Nierenberg, and I am president. 2 minutes. I will start again in a minute. Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Nierenberg. I am president and co-founder of Food Tank. It is such a pleasure to welcome you all here. Thank you so much for those who are watching online and all of you in person. It's so great to see so many old and new friends here today. I want to thank the wonderful Pete Ritchie and all of the Nourish Scotland team for making this event possible. Let's please give them a round of applause. They have been tremendous. And again, I'm just so grateful to all of them. Our first panel is on healthy and sustainable diets. And it's no secret that food and agriculture have often been left off the table, so to speak, at conversations like COP26 and many other international and national forums. But this is the year that things are really changing. And it's because of all of you in this room. And it's because of the people you'll see on stage talking tonight, who I'll introduce in a minute. They're really, really showing that food and agriculture can be a solution to the climate emergency we're all facing right now. So I'm really glad to welcome this group of panelists who come from near and far. I will just introduce them briefly, but you can find out more about them online, but they're all tremendous experts, and I think you'll really enjoy hearing from them. I'm pleased to introduce Brent Locket. Brent is the global food lead scientist for WWF, and he was one of the lead authors on the Eat Lancet report. We're also joined by Pete Ritchie, who I mentioned before, the founder and executive director of Nourish Scotland, and he's also a first-generation farmer. And I have to say that his spirit and his optimism are infectious, and I'm just always so glad to know him. We also have Sandrine Dixson-Declɇve, the president of the Club of Rome. It's such an honor to have you here, Sandrine. Thank you so much. I'm also pleased to introduce my good friend, Sara Farley. Sara is the managing director of the food initiative, the Rockefeller Foundation. She led the Food Systems Vision Prize, which you'll hear about later, and it was an integral part of the UN Food Systems Summit. And she is one of the most energetic people I know. If I could bottle her and Pete, I would make a lot of money. We also have Chemuku Wekesa, a landscape ecologist at the Kenya Forestry Research Institute, whose research has focused on forestry and natural resource management and smallholder innovations for resilient food systems. And I'm so glad you could be here. And last but not least, I'm excited to introduce Mohammed Kadilo, the coordinator of the cultural group of the Rabai Cultural Village. The community is working to protect and conserve sacred Kenya forests using traditional knowledge and practices. I'm so glad you can all be here. Thank you so much. So I want to give Brent Loken a few moments to really set the stage and talk about what healthy and sustainable diets actually are, and give us all some context for this conversation that we'll have this afternoon. Brent, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you, everybody. You know, we've been commenting about how it's so nice to meet everybody in person for once after, after so long. We've been planning and scheming over the past couple of years, and now finally we have this opportunity to meet. And it's just I think we tend to forget how important that is to come together face to face. And that's one of the things about food is one of those things that brings every single person together. I think there's few other things that connects us more than food does. And that's why I love working on food. Food is one of those things that we come, we have conversations over, we fall in love over those over those dinners, I'm sure we've all got some story in our head about something that happened around food. So food is something that we all love to talk about. However, food seems to be something that some people also don't want to talk about. And that has become a real issue, especially when we're talking about climate change. Now, when we're thinking about food, we know that we love to eat it, but we also have to realize that food is probably one of the leading causes globally of biodiversity loss. It's one of the major contributors that we have right now when we're thinking about climate change. It is a major cause of ill health. So food is at the front of this. It's at the front and center. It's at the crux of so many of the issues that we're facing, but yet we don't want to talk about it. We can talk about agriculture, and we want to talk about how we actually produce food, and that's a very important thing to talk about. We talk about food loss and waste more. We talk about regenerative farming, which is extremely important, that we should talk about that kind of stuff. But healthy and sustainable diets is something that we seem to leave off the table for some reason. It seems to be a controversial issue that we have to start addressing. And what is so great about this COP is we're finally starting to talk about it, and we're elevating healthy and sustainable diets to the level that it should be elevated. Because at the end of the day, the latest IPCC, that report highlighted the fact that methane emissions are absolutely front and center in the battle against, if we want to fight climate change. And front and center of that is the food that we eat. We have to start talking about it. So we welcome this conversation today. We've got a great panel to be able to talk about just how important food is. We've got wonderful experts here, and I look forward to having this conversation and hopefully breaking bread later. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brent. And I love that you really identified that food is both personal and political, and we need to elevate that political part. We need to keep talking about it in forums like this and wherever we go, whether it's this COP or the nutrition summit that will happen later this year, or the lead up to Stockholm plus 50 next year. So these conversations need to keep happening. This is not the last one we'll hear about food as both a driver and as a solution to climate change. So I really want to open up the panel now. I want to make this a conversation. I encourage you all to build on what one another says, to interrupt one another. Fist fights have to go outside though, so take those outside. But Sara, I want to turn to you first and give you a chance to talk about why healthy and sustainable diets should be the norm, but right now they're the exception. What are the barriers really holding us back from building healthy and sustainable diets?
Well, I think we have a lot of barriers, right? We have to talk about the desirability of eating healthy and sustainable diets, the affordability, the accessibility, just the sheer availability, depending upon where you live, and the kinds of structural impediments that make it so difficult. But I think, there's two things that I wanted to bring up in terms of, I think, just really, really critical barriers within those four. One of them is just frankly a lack of a definition, right? We've had some incredibly powerful initiatives that have put forward what it could look like to have healthy and sustainable diets, one of those being the Eat Lancet effort. But there's not a global consensus that we can really say has mainstreamed a shared definition that can then be customized for local cuisine and culture and heritage. And because of that, as a global community, we don't have a shared North Star to fight for and to drive, to vote for when it comes to policy and reform. So I think, one, it's this lack of a shared definition, but I think so too, the global capital flows are pushing toward a commodity-driven system that is about yield. And that is a story many, many decades in the making. And so we need to rewire really the financial system to make it more profitable and therefore the more logical choice, both for farmers and for companies and ultimately for governments. And that's going to take policy. It's going to take reform. It's going to take better data, and it's going to take our collective voices saying, this matters. And as Brent said, we no longer think of food just as what goes into our mouths. I think of it as the destiny for my 3-year-old son's health. I think of it as the destiny for my 3-year-old son when he's going to live in a livable planet that can have the biodiversity and the water and the forest and the communities and cultures and And so I think these two things, really shifting capital flows and getting to a North Star, if we can't pull that off, we will not be able to use healthy and sustainable diets as the engine we need to live in a 1.5 degree world.
Great. I want to come back to a lot of the points you make, but now I'd like to turn to Pete, because Sara mentioned this idea of desirability. She mentioned access, affordability, availability. It's really hard for a lot of people, very, very difficult for them to attain healthy and sustainable diets. And when we were speaking last week or the week before, you talked about the number of Scottish people who can eat, in a healthy way, the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables by the government. And it was a really startling statistic. And I'm wondering if you can share it with everyone here.
Sure. We have something in the UK, well, in Scotland, called the Eat Well Guide, which says what you're supposed to be eating. And it's got lots of vegetables on the plate and a little bit of meat and some other animal protein. And, it's some grains. And it's what the government says we should be eating. Only 0.16% of people in Scotland meet those guidelines. So that's 1 in 600 people meets those guidelines. Okay, and there's other people saying, well, the guidelines aren't strong enough. We need 10 portions of vegetables a day. There's not enough veg in this plate. But actually, if only 1 in 600 people are meeting them, really, what value does that guideline have? Because it's not describing a real situation. And I think Sara is absolutely right. We've moved so, would be optimal in terms of messaging. We have huge faith in labeling, and strategies are just simply not adequate to the task if we want to change towards healthy guidelines, let alone sustainable guidelines. And as Sara says, it's about rewiring the system and fundamentally shifting the purpose. After the last World War, the people who then created a commercial passenger industry. And when they started flying the planes, their idea was to get to where they had to be as quickly as possible. And somebody had to say to those pilots, look, your job isn't to fly planes. Your job is to fly people, right? So you have to rethink what your job is. And the problem is, as Sara says, the food system's job has been for a century and a half to maximize commodity production. Food is categorized as a primary industry in industrial classifications in the UK. It's not categorized as service industry. But if you repurpose, if you re-understand the purpose of the food industry as to nourish people without screwing up the planet, in fact, restoring the planet, that's a completely repurposing of the food system. And I'm not clear yet that we've got that clear purpose agreed. And until we've got that clear purpose agreed, it's really hard to make the rules of the road that can get us there.
Are you confident, Pete, that we can get there?
I think as you said, that's in the last COP, and there'll be much more interest the next time around.
Sure.
And I think momentum is building to say, if the purpose of, solving the climate and the nature crisis, it's about the planet, but it's also about people. It's about having people have good lives. And food is absolutely fundamental to people having good lives. And having good lives in a safe planet.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Chemuku and Mohammed, I'd like to turn to you both now, because Pete brought up something really interesting. He said, we've really moved away from healthy and sustainable diets. And what you two are trying to do is preserve traditional diets that are resilient in multiple ways. They're resilient to pests and disease. They're resilient to flooding and drought and other impacts of climate change. And they're really healthy and nutritious and also delicious. I think there's been a failure to understand that traditional and indigenous foods are also some of the most delicious foods on the planet. So I'm wondering if you can both talk about your work to really preserve these traditional diets and make sure that they go to the next generation, that the next generation realizes their importance and continues to preserve them. And Chemuku will be translating for Mohammed, I believe. Is it not working?
Okay, thank you. Traditional knowledge and food systems at local communities, especially in territorial lands, are interconnected. and also with biodiversity. And we have found out that the more diverse crop varieties communities grow, the more they are able to adapt to climate change, the more they are able to be resilient to the changing climatic condition. And the experiences from the Michikenda community, where we have been working with Mohammed's group and the community, has shown that the community is better off investing more in traditional crop varieties because they are resilient to climate change, they are drought tolerant, and also resistant to pests and diseases. And more so, these food crops, they have more health benefits because they are not contaminated with the chemicals that are associated with inorganic fertilizers, for example. And the way they are prepared based on indigenous knowledge is through a traditional way, whereby you don't like have many other ingredients, including the fats that we used to prepare other modern foods. And even in the COVID era, in our community, we have registered 0 cases. And when you speak to the elders, they will tell you that it's because the food they eat have boost their immunity, and since their immunity is better, they are not susceptible to COVID attack. And this has been demonstrated like across various indigenous communities that rely on traditional food for their diet. I will hand over maybe to my colleague to add something, then I can translate.
Asante. Acha niongee Kiswahili.
He will speak Swahili.
Sisi kama kikundi cha Rabai Cultural Village tumekuwa na ukaribu sana na kufanya kazi na wazee wa kaya.
He says his group has been working closely with the Kaya Council of Elders.
Na wazee wa kaya kazi yao kubwa hasa ni kutunza msitu na mila na tamaduni zao.
Their main role is to conserve the sacred forest, their tradition, their rituals, and the associated landscape.
Na kwa sababu hiyo, sisi ni mstari wa mbele kuhakikisha kwamba vyakula vya kitamaduni vyetu tunaweza kuviangazia vizuri na tukahakikisha kwamba tumevipanda na tumevitumia ili viweze kutusaidia sisi wenyewe.
And their focus is to preserve like the traditional crop varieties, cultivate them and utilize them because they really help the community.
Tuliona kwamba hatuwezi kufanya bila wazee wa kaya na mila zao. Hawawezi kuacha vyakula vyetu vya kiasilia ili kuvipanda ama kuviboresha, kwa sababu mila na vyakula ni vitu vinaenda sawa.
He says that there is a strong connection between the culture and also the food system. And you can't separate the two because you need these traditional foods to conduct rituals, to conduct ceremonies, and conduct any cultural events within the community.
Ndio sisi kama Rabai community tunaweza kuja pamoja kuhakikisha kwamba hivi vyakula tumeweza kuviboresha na kuweza kuvipanda kwa wingi ili vikaweze kutusaidia. Hasa wakati huu wa COVID-19 vimeweza sana kutusaidia sisi kama jamii ya Mijikenda, ni kwa sababu tunavyovitumia vingine, kwanza ni dawa, pili ni vyakula ambavyo havina mafuta ama havina mambo mengi, bali ni chakula ambacho kinatosaidia pia uwezo wa kustamili kukaa muda mwingi sana bila kuharibiwa na wadudu.
Okay, he says that they have been working hard to preserve these traditional crop varieties, make sure that they are cultivated in farmlands, because the traditional crop varieties, when you utilize them as food, it improves your immunity, it is able to boost that. And even during this COVID-19, the community was not like getting food from outside. They can sustain their needs within at the community level, and the lockdown never affected them very much. Like any other communities, we had to get out and get food from other areas, and with lockdown, it became a challenge, and sometimes they were really expensive.
Go ahead, please.
Sasa ninamalizia nikisema kwamba sisi kama jamii tumeweza kuja pamoja tukishirikiana na shirika la Kefri, na tumeweza kuhakikisha kwamba kikundi chetu kimeweza kwa mstari wa mbele kuhakikisha kwamba tumepanda hivi vyakula. Ndio sababu hata tuko na hilo gala tumejengewa gala na shirika la Kefri, ambapo tunachukua vyakula vyetu kuweka pale, kisha vyakula hivyo vinasaidia jamii, kwa sababu wakati wa kupanda ama kiangazi sisi huwa tunavihifadhi, alafu wakati wa mvua tunawapatia community kuhakikisha kwamba wameweza kuvipanda ili visipotee katika himaya zetu.
So he's saying he's finishing up by saying that working with us and other partners, they have established a community seed bank where now seeds are collected from community members, stored, and they have rules for sharing these seeds, and this makes it easier for them to access the seeds during the planting season. Then they can share, replant without any cost, and that makes it easy for them to conserve those traditional crop varieties. But he did mention also that when you have traditional crop varieties, you harvest them and preserve, they can stay for a long time than these hybrids. Hybrids are easily attacked by pests when you keep like the maize as opposed to the land races, and this gives the community a safety net on food security matters. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. There's so much in there that I just want to repeat a little bit, that culture and food and our food systems are inextricably linked. There's no doubt about that, that culture and history are so much a part of what we all eat. And I think thank you so much. I couldn't get it to stay. I think there's such a wonderful, this is such a wonderful example of how our local and regional food systems have become so important, especially over the last 20 months, but they need to continue to be preserved. And just a short follow-up question for you both. I'm wondering if you can talk about the role of youth in your communities and how they're being involved in helping to preserve these crops, these traditional and indigenous crops for future generations, and that indigenous knowledge that you're both so intricately aware of.
Initially, I think we had challenges getting youth on board to support the indigenous food systems, because they thought they were backward, and even in schools, it was a challenge to make porridge from millet. But over time, we are trying to change this through our work, because we are creating incentive these foods as commercial. Like before Corona, we had many tourists coming to the coast and visiting the village. And one of the package is them to have the traditional foods as on their menu, and the youth, both men and women, will prepare this, and the tourists, after being shown around the Kaya forest and other sites within the landscape, they will come for lunch in the village. Then they can pay for it, and the youth can make some money. And then when that happens, they appreciate this, and now they have become part and parcel of this train or this journey. And being youth. Yes. So maybe Kadilo can add if he has something, then I can help translate.
Sasa sisi kama kikundi tunaweza kuwa mstari wa mbele kuelimisha vijana, na walikuwa hawajaelewa hii elimu, lakini baadaye wakashika, na sasa tuna ushirikiano mkubwa. Tena sisi kama kikundi tunatembea mashule kuhamasisha watoto kuhusiana na mbegu hizi asilia zetu za kitamaduni, kwamba ni muhimu kuzipanda na ni muhimu kutumia vyakula ili kuweza kutusaidia katika miili yetu.
So he says through a lot of awareness and sensitization, they have been reaching out to the youth, and now the youth understand. But of course, they have also programs to go to schools and create awareness among school-going children about culture and these traditions, and why they are important, and why they should conserve them, and the benefits of eating them and having them on their diets. And as I had mentioned, like now the issue of porridge from millet, which was unpopular, now is popular among the schools. Thank you.
That's so wonderful that we can make these foods popular again and keep them popular, that it's not just a trend, that it's something that's sustained. And I loved how you both talked about the incentives that are needed. Everyone needs incentives to be able to do this, the economic incentive to be able to grow these crops and continue them. They're not just, sort of precious crops that we, should look at in a museum. They are crops that we all need to recognize and understand that are important for the resilience of communities and the environment. So thank you both so much. I'd really like to turn to Sandrine now. Sandrine, you are prolific in your writing and your speaking, and I've had the pleasure of listening to you before. And in a recent article you co-authored, you write that we are facing a triple planetary crisis. There's climate, there's a natural nature and biodiversity crisis, and there's a human health crisis. So we're facing a lot right now. How are food systems connecting between these multiple crises, and how can the food system, our food systems, really help solve?
Thank you. I just forgot to use it, so thank you. I want to build on what's been said, because I think the stage has been very nicely laid out for the question of repurposing the food system. The Club of Rome and my work in the past has been on different levels. One is, how is it that we actually have continued to function within an economy that doesn't place a value on what truly matters? And what has been so well said is food has been commodified, and in many cases, governments have forgotten that access to food is their first responsibility, making sure that people do not go hungry. That is key. And we've talked a lot about healthy food, but in particular, working with the World Food Programme at the UN Food System Summit, where I actually led, co-chaired with Salim Hook from Bangladesh, at the conversations that I was having with many countries, including African countries, and Latin American countries, who'd forgotten as governments that their priority was to ensure that their people did not go hungry. And so I want to speak about that because it's the dysfunctionality of the purpose of the economy, which is creating the hunger and not enabling us to be able to prioritize local production for local consumption. Which then, of course, if we're coming back to preserving the original seed, which, by the way, most women do, giving birth, as my co-president of the Club of Rome, Fede says, we women are the carriers of the original seed. Now, if you look in Africa, many women are preserving those seeds and hiding them under their pillows in order to ensure that they actually are not taken away because of genetically modified organisms. Where is it that we lost sight as humanity that it is our responsibility to ensure that most of the world does not go hungry? Number two priority is that it is healthy. Absolutely. But the first priority is food is the essence of our lives and livelihoods. So if we look at that, first we need to think of the depth of the dysfunctionality within our economic system, which is producing and promoting productivity overall and short-term decision as well as short-term profiteering. If you then apply that to the food system, what do you get? Focus on trade, focus on a balance sheet, which in a country that hopefully will get you into some kind of economic profit without thinking about the fact that your people are going hungry while you're doing that. And that your country is being devastated by industrial agricultural practices, which are not preserving, once again, the biodiversity or ensuring that we reduce emissions overall because we are cutting down forests in order to produce beef, which then is exported in order to somehow make our trade balance sheet better. So apologies for being provocative, but this does get to me when we don't go back to basics, which is the food system is part of the broader economic system, which is broken. Coming back to why is this a unique moment in history and why food can play such a part? And I think there are several reasons. One is it is the connector with the tipping points. You are so right. That planetary emergency, which is based on a climate emergency, biodiversity loss, and to some degree, social emergency, because we continue to have increasing poverty while some areas grow and others don't. Food can be the linchpin for change. If we are able to demonstrate that we go back to basics, to feeding people, ensuring that we protect our biodiversity, our forests, and we start to look at feed, fiber, and forests, and the way in which we use land in a much more environmentally productive manner that is repurposed for people, planet, and prosperity. We're getting, and the land, by the way, can be in an urban environment as well. We are seeing the way in which we can use urban gardens to bring people back to the land so that they understand that they are part of nature and nature is part of them. So it's not just rebuilding our rural communities, which are completely disenfranchised, bringing back Indigenous people and smallholders, which need to continue to be the stewards of the land, but reminding urban dwellers that they are part of the land. And if you look at that, all of a sudden we have transformation right there, because people have realized, and I think COVID has made people realize, and so true, and you were saying the same, people have realized that resilience is what we get back to basehoods are actually fully interdependent on those that are the most vulnerable somewhere else, but also that our livelihoods, when we are in a quarantine or we are confined and we cannot go out, are dependent on getting access to the most essentials: food, water, some cases, unfortunately, toilet paper. But hopefully most people realize, and social care, by the way, healthcare, those are the three key principles. So I want to maybe end with that everything is systemic. For people on the journey. But industrial producers who do not want to shift, whether it be those that for the wrong reasons that do not want to shift, and whether it be those that want to continue to put themselves and their own profits over feeding and ensuring that their people and their livelihoods are protected. That's why we all need to connect those dots and be much more forceful in saying that, coming back to Brent's fabulous point at the beginning, food is about nourishing the soul. It's about the culture. It's about keeping us alive, but it's also bringing us back to the land and making us full again and whole again.
Sandrine, if only you could, and not just the promo, that's important. You have given me so much to work with here. I want to repeat that, you know what you said about dysfunctional governments. This is key. We need to understand this, and are not addressing food in the way that they could or should be. And second, you said food is a linchpin for change. And I'm hoping we can dig into that among you first, Sara.
Policies to the definitions to the market drivers signaling demand. And one of the areas we've been looking at where we see that possibility is public procurement. So public is where you have the opportunity to shift really big purchasers, often purchasers that are serving disenfranchised. And I'll give the example in the United States. Public schools, if you take a school district the size of Los Angeles, so big city in Southern California, Los Angeles Unified School District serves 680,000 meals a day, okay? So historically, those meals have not been very high quality, neither from a nutrition perspective nor from a climate perspective in terms of those ingredients being sourced from regenerative or sustainable supply chains. So how could you reimagine that? We have a partner called the Center for Good Food Purchasing, led by Paula Daniels. They created to store food, local economies, animal welfare, the degree to which the food communities and workers are being valued as a workforce. So back to LA Unified. LA Unified adopted the good food purchasing standards. And so all of their procured food was rated. In a single year, they, using that standard, realized we are not using the food suppliers here in a share of their sourced foods by 20% in a single year. They decreased the procurement of processed meat by 21% and decreased animal source protein, of which there was an abundance for this particular population. Right? And then what does that do? Those procurement signals send a message to private producers that there's a market here. You know, if I can shift to profiling the local producers, to valuing the workforce in a different way, I could maybe get a contract with LA Unified. So one of the ways to do this, public procurement and standards.
Wonderful. Sandrine, you wanted to jump in?
I love this example, and it's one of my favorite also in the work in which we did in terms of solutions. And it's something that can be transferred to any country, any city, anywhere. And the reason I also love it is that we can take it to the next step. I mean, the trickle down from this example is beautiful. First, it empowers local communities. In urban settings, once again, it can bring communities together, whether it be around school gardens or whether it be around other producers that are in the area. So all of a sudden, you are creating an economy. The other importance is that you also then can start to talk about waste.
Mm-hmm.
You can think through the entire value chain, already curing better food for the community. You're ensuring that actually you reduce your waste The kids talk about it to their parents. You influence the home, and hello, it's a new economic system right there, because you can use that as economy where it is bottom up. People are looking at their changing behaviors, and it has a series of other knock-on effects. The schools can then bring that into the educational system. Renewables, you can bring in new energy sources, and you just start to have a series of positive knock-on effects.
Yeah, I want to build on this. And, you know, I mean, there's no easy answer. And I think the example that you gave, Sara, is a really important one. But one of the things I think we all want to look for, that silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. And I think procurement is a very important one that we need to look at. But it's really complex, and you've heard so many different issues up here. We've all been talking about different things: Pete, the farming, local communities, culture.
Right.
You know, and it's a huge complex system. And if we want to create the change, one of the things, I don't know how to do it, but I know what we can't do. And one of the things that we can't do is we can't put the onus just on consumers. That we can't just say it's gonna be done through education campaigns, it's going to be done through consumer awareness, and all of a sudden consumers are going to walk into a grocery store and they've got their 2 kids by them, and they're going to take the time to read labels and all that kind of stuff. That's putting too much onus on the individual consumer to create the change. What we also have to do, that's important, we have to do that. We also need the top-down policy in place to create things like that procurement, which then creates the right type of, you know, environment. We have to put the pressure where the pressure needs to be put. We have to put food on the table in these climate negotiations, and currently it is not. And by having that top-down influence and that bottom-up influence and really sandwiching it in and raising the noise, we have to keep on doing it. And if we don't come at it from both sides, I don't see how we're going to be able to create the change that we want.
Absolutely. That top-down and bottom-up needs to happen at the same time. And we need all sorts of forces at play here. Mohammed and Chemuku, I want to turn back to you and talk about what you think is needed in the Kenyan government to really convince them that they should pay attention to traditional food systems, that they should take policy priorities.
I think we are trying to we want the government to adopt a model that looks at the landscape, and this model brings all the resources in the landscape under a single management in an integrated manner, and where the community leads the process and not the government taking the lead for ownership. And this model, which is based on the biological resources, which is the biodiversity, is based on the and also the people. We believe this is the solution, and we have been engaging the policy makers so that we can they can buy in, and when they balance, where communities will be empowered to manage their landscape, make decisions about their landscape, and do things that they feel are good and answers their problems. And to date, I think we are moving to have this to register Rabai cultural landscape under this model, and we are, because agriculture is a developed function in my country, but of course it has come with more challenges before than when it was under national government, because we had several agricultural boards at district level, provincial level, and national level, where decision could be made to change some behavior, to change some action in agricultural system. But with the devolution, all this was killed, and communities are not being given like space to participate in some decision. So this model allow communities like to participate in decision making, especially on issues on agriculture and natural resource management. And when communities participate in decision making, they can voice what they think is best, including the varieties they think that when they grow them, they are likely to get some harvest, even if it is not enough to take to the market, but is adequate to address their local food needs. And when you have for each and every community, then you address the national food needs, you address the regional food needs, you address the global food security. Thank you.
Mimi nikiwa kamati pamoja na community tunafanya watu wa nyanjani hasa wa kitengo cha agriculture.
The third industrial revolution, agricultural revolutions, pesticides, chemicals, more machinery, more trade, we measure tons per hectare. We use a simple carbon metrics. The more tons per hectare we get out, the unit of greenhouse gas, and we go down that track, we will get more of the same. And that's a real challenge. And it's like convert food into sewage. They tend to push for that, so they tend to push. But the Rabai community, they did that amazing ceremony. You know, it was grown and it was made into food. We have this difficulty of all these different ways of valuing. Sustainable livelihoods and all that and all the cost. You need to Nourish per hectare. And you know, our industrial food systems feed most of that grain we produce to animals and nourish fewer. And we need to look at farms per hectare. How much they're raising per hectare. When we start to look at those methods and the system that you operate, you know, it comes out well above, you know, clearly the system most of the world operates. And if we move further down, in the fourth approach, that becomes we're growing factories and we divorce ourselves entirely from that. You know, then we really hold ourselves to play.
Thank you so much, Pete. I love this. Jobs per hectare, diversity per hectare, joy per hectare is not. It asks these wonderful panelists and questions. And one of my colleagues has a really nice, she's in the back, in a black shirt like everyone else. She's standing up. Just say your name.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mitchell from Forestry. Really interesting, great panel, and very important to the agenda of the crop. We have remarked about the absence of that, and yesterday, the Marrakesh Partnership was talking about and at COP27. So I would love to hear each of you what you want to see from the climate COP in terms of food. What foods are you making for them to pay attention, excuse me, to food now?
That's an excellent question. And we've got Sandrine go first. We can just take maybe 30 seconds so we can get for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just sharing a taxi with the person who actually from the Chemuku partnership has been working on that, and we're all very disappointed with the links. I think that everybody thought the UN Food System Summit would do the trick. Absolutely not. The key call is 50% of all arable land should be regenerative by 2030 latest. And I also led the Nature Day for the summit itself with the world leaders, joining the dot between the commodities pledge that was made by the UK government and many other governments, the deforestation pledge, and a land use pledge is fundamental. And some of that is bringing in the arable land transformation towards regen by 2030. If we already start with that, and then yes, we need to think about healthy food for a healthy planet, bringing in, but I think stopping, at least from a climate perspective, joining the dots with biodiversity as well, shifting our arable land already, 50% of it across the globe into regenerative would be quite an amazing.
Thank you, Brent.
I think it would be spectacular if we could get COP27 and food COP, and whatever we have to do between that. I mean, the work starts now today, and that's one of the things that let's pull our heads together, pull our brains together, and figure out how we actually do that. We just wrote a food manifesto that we published, and we have a couple of key things in there. One of the key things that we would like to highlight is that NDC, and as we look towards this updated revision process for 2023, it has to take food systems approach. It's absolutely critical. We can't just be looking at siloed components of the food system. We have to be looking at all of it. And if we don't take that type of approach and really get that embedded into kind of dealing with national level NDCs, you know, what we measure matters, then we will not be able to achieve tariffs that will be off. So that's.
Thanks, Sarah.
Just a small build on the definitions, I think between now and next year, if we can help coalesce and convene those that we want to achieve the 50% transition to regenerative so that we have a unifying definition of regenerative, and so too on diet. What do we mean by diet quality? What do we mean by good food? If we can lay the pathway between now and COP27 around definitions, I think that would be a remarkable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Maybe my comment on this, we need to strike a and is very key in supporting the food systems, even if it is indirectly through biodiversity conservation, and also enhancing the population of the pollinators, which are key in ensuring that production is not affected.
Thank you so much.
There's a difficulty again, those definitions, because I think we have this idea that modernity is freezing fossil cows, producing 12,000 liters of milk and lactation, and you suck the methane when you run around the shed with the outside, and you make that into biofuel, and everybody's happy. We think that's modernity, right? But in the more, sorry, I keep talking about wars, sorry. That horrible bubble, the only regions, the only communities in the UK that could actually get people who were tall enough and fit enough. Or infantilizing people with their diets, seducing people with diets, and making people sick with the diets. And the problem is that we think that's modernity. And then when you look at where people like yourself have been able to maintain traditional crops, traditional diets, and you see actually the impact on health that has. So we have to learn from people who haven't gone down the road we've gone down, not say, oh, if we go further down the road.
Thank you so much, Pete. I love this, you all. We're going to have to end the question and answer, but I think and we don't have to have this dystopian future, but we can have a future that's really beautiful and wonderful and you're we'll be back in about 15 minutes for our rest now. All of this